The sun crested slowly over the rugged hills of the remote desert outpost, casting long shadows across a terrain that seemed deceptively peaceful. Dust swirled in the warm morning air as the 340 Marines prepared for what was supposed to be a routine operation. Their armored vehicles hummed with readiness, rifles gleaming under the early light, and the faint smell of gun oil mixed with the earthy scent of dry soil. For most, this was just another mission, another day to follow orders and survive. But for Lieutenant Sarah Hayes, the day felt different. Sarah stood slightly apart from the formation, adjusting the straps of her tactical vest. Her uniform, crisp and worn, wore the faint traces of previous mission scuffs, sweat stains, and the faint hint of dry blood. She had earned her reputation, over years of grueling deployments, earning the respect of the men and women she led. Calm, analytical, and fiercely determined, she had an uncanny ability to anticipate danger, to read the battlefield in ways that seemed almost instinctual. Today, though, she felt a ripple of unease in her chest, a quiet whisper that the morning would not unfold as planned. She surveyed the faces of her Marines, each one a story of courage, fear, and hope. There was Corporal Diaz, young and eager, his first overseas mission. Private First Class Thompson, a seasoned soldier whose eyes betrayed both weariness and determination. Sergeant McAllister, a father of 3, who hid his anxiety behind a gruff exterior. Together, they were a tight-knit unit, a web of trust built over months of training, laughter, shared hardship, and silent understanding. Sarah's eyes met theirs briefly, and in that moment, she silently promised herself she would not let anything happen to them, not if she could prevent it. The morning briefing had been routine, filled with maps, objectives, and contingencies. The mission was straightforward in theory: secure a strategic outpost on the edge of enemy territory, hold it until reinforcements arrived, and minimize casualties. Command had emphasized precision, caution, and strict adherence to protocol. Radios buzzed intermittently, carrying distant voices of officers issuing instructions and checking in on progress. Laughter and casual chatter floated among the troops, a thin veneer of normalcy masking the tension that lingered just beneath the surface. As Sarah adjusted her helmet, she thought of the terrain ahead. Rolling hills, narrow ridges, and dry riverbeds offered natural cover, but they also hid threats. The enemy was clever, unpredictable, and relentless. She ran scenarios through her mind, mentally rehearsing routes, fallback points, and emergency protocols. She checked the positioning of her Marines, confirming that everyone had their radios, ammunition, and basic necessities. Small details mattered. In combat, survival often hinged on preparation as much as courage. Around her, the convoy stirred to life. Engines rumbled, boots clattered against armored floors, and the hum of distant helicopters punctuated the air. The tension was palpable, even in casual gestures. A Marine patting a buddy on the shoulder, a soldier wiping sweat from his brow, someone nervously chewing on the strap of a helmet. Sarah watched them, noting the subtle signs of anxiety. She had learned that battle was as much mental as it was physical. Fear could paralyze or motivate, and it was her responsibility to ensure her team was the latter. She walked among them, stopping briefly at each squad, offering quiet words of encouragement. "Stay sharp," she said to a young Marine who was visibly tense. "Trust your training. Trust each other." Her voice was steady, calm, authoritative. No grand speeches, just clear, measured reassurance. She could see the effect almost immediately. Shoulders straightened, eyes focused, movements more deliberate. Leadership wasn't about fearlessness. It was about inspiring confidence, even in the face of uncertainty. The morning sun climbed higher, and the heat began to intensify. Dust clung to uniforms, and the wind carried the faint scent of dry brush. Birds scattered from nearby rocks, startled by the occasional distant gunfire echoing from training grounds, a reminder that even in relative calm, danger could be near. Sarah's mind drifted briefly to her family back home, a fleeting thought she quickly pushed aside. There would be time for personal reflection later. For now, her focus was absolute. Every life depended on the clarity of her decisions. Radio chatter grew sporadic as the convoy began moving toward the objective. Sarah climbed into the lead vehicle, scanning the horizon with trained eyes. The undulating hills stretched endlessly, each ridge and dip a potential threat. Shadows moved unnaturally among rocks, perhaps a trick of the light, perhaps not. Her instincts told her to remain vigilant, to anticipate, to be ready for the unexpected. She glanced at her team, noting their readiness and the subtle tensions that ran through them. The weight of responsibility settled heavier on her shoulders with every passing moment. As they advanced, minor distractions emerged. A wheel sticking. Slightly in the sand, a Marine fumbling with a piece of equipment, the distant bark of a command over radio frequencies. Sarah responded swiftly, addressing issues before they escalated. Efficiency was critical. Hesitation could be fatal. She thought about the stories she had heard from other deployments, how quickly a seemingly calm mission could descend into chaos. Today, she silently vowed, would not become one of those stories. The convoy crested a small ridge, revealing a valley below where the outpost awaited. The structure looked peaceful, almost innocuous from this distance, yet Sarah's instincts screamed caution. The landscape offered both opportunity and danger. High ground meant visibility, but also exposure. She signaled the convoy to halt briefly, observing the terrain and scanning for movement. Every detail mattered: the rustle of bushes, the glint of metal, the faintest sign of human presence. She crouched beside her vehicle, whispering instructions to her team. Eyes sharp. Check every approach. Don't assume anything. Stay ready to move on my signal. The Marines nodded, absorbing her calm but urgent tone. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach: anticipation, not fear. The mission would demand more than adherence to orders. It would demand courage, initiative, and sometimes defiance of convention. And deep down, she knew that soon the true test would begin. A distant rumble reached her ears. Not vehicles, not thunder, but something else: ominous, rhythmic, deliberate. Sarah straightened, scanning the horizon, her mind racing through possibilities. Enemy scouts? A trap? Or merely her nerves playing tricks? She couldn't afford to wait for certainty. She checked her watch, counted her Marines, and prepared to issue the first operational commands. Soon, the calm of the morning would shatter. And when it did, the lives of 340 Marines would rest in part on her decisions, her courage, and the quiet defiance that had carried her through countless challenges before. The sun climbed higher, shadows shortening across the desert floor. Sarah's heartbeat steadied, her eyes sharp, her mind alert. Today, the ordinary would become extraordinary. And she was ready. The convoy moved cautiously into the valley, the sun now blazing overhead and casting stark, harsh shadows across the dry, rugged terrain. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes led from the front, scanning every ridge and rock for signs of movement. Her senses were heightened, every instinct honed from years of deployments, alert to the faintest hint of danger. The Marines followed her commands with quiet efficiency, rifles raised, eyes darting, each one aware that the silence of the morning was a fragile thing. At first, everything seemed ordinary. The wind whispered through the canyon, dust spiraled lazily in the sun, and the distant sounds of wildlife punctuated the tense quiet. Sarah allowed herself a brief assessment. Stay alert, she reminded her squad. Eyes sharp. Check every blind spot. Keep communications tight. The Marines responded with steady nods, their confidence in her palpable. Every subtle gesture mattered. Hesitation could cost lives. Then, without warning, a sharp crack split the air. It was not a warning shot or the echo of distant artillery. It was close, too close. Sand erupted from the earth near the lead vehicle as the first bullet hit the ground, kicking up sparks and dust. Marines dove instinctively, seeking cover behind vehicles and jagged rocks. Panic rippled through the ranks as multiple shots rang out in rapid succession, punctuated by explosions from improvised mines buried along the approach. The enemy had been waiting. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. Positions. Hold your ground. Move forward carefully. She ducked behind the armored vehicle, her heart hammering, but her mind razor-sharp. Her eyes scanned rapidly. Enemy fighters were taking advantage of the natural cover, popping up from behind rocks, firing with deadly precision. Radios crackled frantically, but then the worst realization struck. Command was silent. No updates, no instructions, no guidance. The usual stream of orders had vanished, leaving the Marines isolated, exposed, and vulnerable. She moved quickly, assessing the situation. Corporal Diaz had been hit, clutching his shoulder with a stifled groan. PFC Thompson froze, paralyzed by fear as a round whizzed past him. Sergeant McAllister barked orders to his squad, but was clearly struggling to regain control of the situation. Sarah, he shouted. What do we do? Sarah didn't hesitate. Follow my lead. Everyone to cover along the ridge. Evacuate the wounded first. Her voice was calm, commanding, precise. She knew that hesitation now could be fatal. Every second mattered. Defying standard protocol meant risking reprimand later, but right now, survival was paramount. Her Marines trusted her implicitly, and they moved as one under her direction. Bullets ricocheted from rocks, and smoke from small explosions filled the air, stinging eyes and choking lungs. Sarah ran across open ground, dragging a wounded Marine behind a makeshift barricade. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, despite the danger. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, but she could not afford doubt. Her every decision mattered, and 340 lives depended on her ability to act decisively. The enemy pressed relentlessly. Their positions were hidden among the terrain, using the valley's natural cover to their advantage. They were methodical, experienced, and brutal, exploiting the initial confusion caused by the broken communication with command. Sarah quickly adapted, directing squads to counterfire positions, coordinating defensive maneuvers that relied on her intimate knowledge of the terrain. The Marines responded, rallying around her calm authority. A sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them, throwing Sarah to the dirt. She struggled to her feet, heart racing as dust and debris coated her uniform. Around her, Marines shouted, some injured, some disoriented, all depending on her. Her mind raced through every tactical option. Retreat was impossible. Reinforcements were uncertain, and every delay increased the risk of casualties. Sarah realized there was no choice but to defy standard procedures and lead by instinct. She moved from position to position, shouting instructions over the roar of gunfire. Suppressing fire on the left. Cover the ridge. Move the wounded to the center. Her voice carried authority, cutting through fear. Marines responded, executing maneuvers that were initially improvisational but increasingly effective. One by one, they regained cohesion, inspired by her example. Sarah's defiance of protocol had become the thread holding them together, turning panic into coordinated action. Corporal Diaz groaned again, and Sarah knelt beside him, applying a tourniquet with practiced hands. Stay with me, she said firmly. His eyes met hers, a flicker of trust and gratitude amidst the chaos. Around them, explosions continued to shake the valley, but she refused to let despair creep in. Every action, every command, every calculated risk was aimed at preserving life and maintaining order. The enemy attempted to flank them, moving along the narrow ridges with terrifying precision. Sarah anticipated the maneuver, sending squads to intercept, repositioning forces in real time. The Marines executed her orders with discipline, their respect for her unwavering. She could see the small victories, the enemy losing ground, their flanking attempts faltering, but the cost was high. Casualties were mounting, and the constant pressure of engagement tested every Marine's resolve. Despite the chaos, Sarah maintained clarity. Her eyes scanned every movement, noting patterns, adjusting strategies. She moved with purpose, making snap decisions that could determine the outcome of the entire operation. Every instinct told her where the enemy would strike next. Every experience prepared her to act swiftly. This was no longer a routine mission. It had become a fight for survival, and she had become the pivot on which everything depended. Hours seemed to pass in moments. The valley, once calm and deceptively peaceful, had transformed into a crucible of fire and dust. Marines leaned on her guidance, trusting her judgment even when radios remained dead. She had become their lifeline, the embodiment of leadership under fire. She knew that any hesitation, any mistake, could spell disaster, not just for her, but for all 340 Marines under her command. As the sun climbed higher, a lull in the fighting provided a brief window of opportunity. Sarah gathered her squad leaders, whispering rapid instructions. Hold the line here. Evacuate the wounded to cover. Watch the ridges. Any movement is likely the enemy. We adapt, we survive. Her words were precise, calm, and resolute. Even amidst fear, the Marines felt hope rekindled. Her defiance of conventional protocol, leading without orders, improvising under pressure, was now the key to their survival. Then, from the far ridge, a shout erupted, a warning, a signal, a reminder that the enemy had not relented. Bullets flew again, and the valley erupted in chaos. Sarah's heart pounded, her body pushed to its limits, but she moved with determination. Every step, every command, every risk taken was calculated to save lives. She had made a silent promise to each Marine. No one would be left behind. By the time the first signs of night began to creep over the horizon, the battle had taken its toll. Dust, smoke, and blood mingled in the air. The Marines were battered, exhausted, but still alive. And though command remained silent, Sarah Hayes had emerged as the anchor in the storm, a defiant, courageous leader whose actions had begun to turn panic into purpose, chaos into cohesion. In the valley of uncertainty, where orders had vanished and lives hung by a thread, one woman had moved. And for the first time, the Marines began to believe that survival was not just a hope, but a possibility. Night had not yet fallen, but shadows stretched long across the valley, creating a shifting maze of light and dark. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the metallic tang of gunfire. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes crouched behind a shattered wall, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the terrain for any movement. The initial ambush had thrown the Marines into chaos, but now, in this fragile lull, Sarah understood that the mission's success and the survival of every one of the 340 Marines depended on the decisions she would make in the next few critical minutes. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of responsibility. She moved quickly, whispering into her radio, "Squads 1 and 3, check the eastern ridge. Move cautiously, enemy presence likely. Cover the wounded. No one moves alone." The crackle of static was her only answer. Command remained silent. There were no reinforcements, no guidance from above, nothing but her own judgment. This was uncharted territory, where hesitation could mean catastrophe, and boldness could mean salvation. From her vantage point, Sarah could see Corporal Diaz leaning against a rock, still pale from his wound, but alert. She crawled to him, kneeling to assess the injury again. "Pressures holding?" she whispered. He nodded faintly, biting back pain. Good. We'll move him to safer cover in a minute. Stay ready. Around them, Marines fumbled with equipment, trying to regain composure, their fear evident but controlled. Sarah's calm presence was a beacon. They relied on her not only for orders, but for reassurance that they could survive. The enemy, sensing the lull, began repositioning. Shadows moved along the ridges, and occasional rifle fire reminded everyone that danger was far from over. Sarah made a quick calculation. The valley offered cover in some areas, but was a trap in others. Any exposure could be deadly. She signaled 2 squads to shift positions, forming a makeshift perimeter to stabilize their defense. The Marines executed her orders, trusting her judgment even in the absence of official command. A shout from the eastern ridge drew Sarah's attention. A small group of Marines had become pinned behind debris, caught in a crossfire. Without thinking, she leapt from cover, dashing through open ground to reach them. Bullets ricocheted off rocks around her, some grazing her vest. Her pulse surged, every sense heightened. She reached the Marines, barking precise instructions. Suppressing fire on your left. Move diagonally. Cover each other. One by one, the trapped soldiers followed her guidance, escaping the kill zone. It was during moments like this that Sarah's defiance of protocol became essential. Military procedures dictated waiting for orders, ensuring that every move was sanctioned from above. But in this valley, waiting meant death. Sarah adapted in real time, using instinct, experience, and an intimate understanding of both the terrain and her troops. She made split-second decisions: who would advance, who would cover, who would evacuate the wounded, all while maintaining her own movement under fire. As the Marines stabilized, Sarah took stock of their position. The eastern ridge was partially secured. The wounded had been moved to relative safety, and squads were covering each other effectively. Yet the enemy's presence was relentless. From the western edge, sniper fire began picking off anyone moving too quickly, forcing soldiers to hug the rocky terrain. The stress was palpable. Some Marines whispered prayers, others gritted their teeth, and all of them, knowingly or unknowingly, relied on Sarah's unwavering focus. She called for a quick regroup. Listen up. We hold this line. We push forward only when I give the signal. Keep your heads down, your rifles ready, and watch each other's backs. Her tone was firm, measured, commanding authority without inspiring panic. The Marines nodded, adjusting positions, redistributing ammunition, and tending minor injuries. Every movement was deliberate. Every action coordinated. Sarah's leadership was no longer just guiding. They had begun to mirror her decisiveness, her calm under fire, her relentless refusal to accept chaos. Suddenly, an explosion erupted nearby, sending debris flying in all directions. Dust choked the air, and screams echoed. Sarah instinctively dove for cover. Her body pressed against a rock as shards of metal and sand showered down. When the dust settled, she assessed the situation. 2 Marines were injured minor wounds, nothing life-threatening, but enough to slow movement. She immediately began directing medics and other squad members to secure them. We move them in groups of 3, she ordered. Cover each other. Do not rush. Precision over speed. While coordinating this evacuation, Sarah noticed a movement along a ridge that threatened to cut off their supply line. She made a split-second decision. Corporal Diaz, you take Squad 4 and intercept the ridge. I'll cover the wounded and reorganize the rest of the Marines. His eyes widened, but she shook her head sharply. No buts, move now. He nodded, leading his squad with newfound determination. Sarah turned back to her remaining Marines, her mind racing. Every decision was life or death. Every command had consequences she could not ignore. The firefight resumed, more intense than before. Enemy snipers, armed with patience and precision, picked targets carefully. Sarah moved among her Marines, coordinating suppressive fire, guiding them to safer positions, and ensuring that injured soldiers were protected. Her calm decisiveness began to ripple through the unit. Marines who had frozen in panic found themselves acting with renewed purpose, inspired by her courage and example. Every action reinforced the bond between leader and troops. Every moment of defiance strengthened their resolve. Hours dragged on in a relentless haze of smoke, gunfire, and fear. Sarah rarely paused, yet even brief moments revealed her humanity. She offered words of comfort to frightened Marines, reassured those injured, and maintained eye contact with soldiers struggling to regain composure. Her actions became more than strategy. They became a lifeline, a moral compass guiding the Marines through a battle that had no clear end. By late afternoon, the enemy seemed to regroup, attempting a coordinated push through the northern approach. Sarah quickly assessed the threat. Squads 2 and 5, hold the ridge line. Squad 6, provide covering fire. I'll maneuver the center. Her orders were executed with efficiency that amazed even seasoned soldiers. It was no longer just instinct. It was leadership honed through years of training and battlefield experience, tested now in the crucible of immediate danger. As night began to approach, the valley seemed to shrink, shadows blending with smoke to create a labyrinth of peril. Sarah realized that the first real decisions of command had been made. Without guidance from above, she had stepped into the void, using Defiance as a tool for survival. Her calculated risk-taking had prevented further loss of life and allowed the Marines to hold their positions. Yet she knew the worst was yet to come. The enemy had tested their patience, and Sarah could sense the escalation approaching. Her mind raced through possibilities, counterattacks, reinforcements, tactical withdrawals. Every scenario had to be accounted for, every risk measured. But for now, the Marines had survived the first wave. They were battered, shaken, but still alive. And more importantly, they had begun to trust her completely, following her orders not because protocol demanded it, but because courage demanded it. Amidst the chaos, she took a fleeting moment to glance at the valley below. Smoke curled in lazy tendrils over the rocks, and scattered fires reflected the devastation. Her Marines crouched in strategic positions, breathing heavily, eyes alert. Sarah knew the coming hours would demand more courage, more defiance, more leadership. But she also knew that this first crucible had proven one truth. With determination, clarity, and bold action, she could guide 340 Marines through any storm. The sun dipped lower, casting an amber glow over the battlefield. Shadows deepened, and the first stars began to emerge. Sarah Hayes tightened her grip on her rifle, scanning the ridges, her mind already preparing for the next wave. The first real decisions had been made. And in this valley, where command had gone silent, one woman's defiance had kept hundreds alive. The fight was far from over, but now the Marines were ready to follow, wherever she led. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the jagged hills, casting long shadows across the valley floor. The once peaceful landscape was now scarred by craters, scorched earth, and the echo of relentless gunfire. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes crouched behind a shattered wall, her eyes scanning the chaos around her. The Marines had fought valiantly through the ambush, but exhaustion and injuries were beginning to take their toll. Every breath was heavy, every movement deliberate. The enemy, sensing their fatigue, was preparing to strike harder. Sarah quickly assessed the situation. The eastern ridge, once secure, now faced renewed enemy pressure. Shadows shifted along the rocks, signaling movements she had not anticipated. Explosions shook the ground as mortar and improvised explosives detonated around the Marines. She could feel the fear in the air, a tangible weight pressing on the unit, but she refused to let it paralyze her or the men. Her voice cut sharply through the valley. Hold your positions. Do not let them flank us. Keep the line. Marines responded, adjusting their stances, weapons raised, eyes wide with both fear and determination. Corporal Diaz and his squad had returned from the ridge, reporting multiple enemy groups attempting to encircle their position. "We need to hold this line, Lieutenant," Diaz shouted, his voice tinged with urgency. Sarah nodded, her mind racing through tactical options. Retreat was not feasible. Reinforcements were uncertain, and the valley offered no easy escape. Every decision she made now could mean the difference between survival and disaster. She moved swiftly among the Marines, shouting precise instructions over the cacophony of gunfire. Squad 2, cover the western approach. Squad 4, shift to support the center. Evacuate the wounded in groups of 3. Her defiance of protocol, acting independently, without command approval, was now the only thing keeping her unit alive. She became the pivot around which the chaos moved, her every action calculated to preserve life and maintain cohesion. Suddenly, sniper fire from a distant ridge forced several Marines to dive for cover. One soldier cried out in pain as a round grazed his shoulder. Sarah sprinted across open ground, ignoring the hail of bullets whipping past her. She reached the injured Marine, applied a tourniquet, and dragged him behind a protective barrier. Every second counted. Hesitation would have meant death. Her courage inspired those around her, igniting a spark of determination that ran through the ranks. The enemy pressed relentlessly, exploiting every weakness in the Marines' defenses. Explosions tore through makeshift barricades, smoke choked the air, and shouts of commands mixed with cries of pain and determination. Sarah had to make split-second tactical decisions. Move left flank forward. Cover fire on the ridge. No one moves alone. Her commands were precise, executed with disciplined efficiency. The Marines began to move like a single unit, their fear transformed into action by her leadership. Amid the chaos, Sarah's mind raced. She had to anticipate enemy movements, redistribute forces, and safeguard the wounded. Every decision was a gamble, every command a lifeline. She crouched briefly behind a rock, scanning the horizon. Enemy fighters were using the terrain cleverly, attempting to split the Marines into isolated pockets. Sarah's instincts kicked in. She anticipated their movements, repositioned her squads, and fortified their defensive line. The enemy faltered, but their assault was far from over. Corporal Diaz returned, breathless, reporting heavy enemy presence approaching the southern ridge. Sarah immediately ordered squads to create a crossfire trap, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. She moved between positions, coordinating suppressive fire and ensuring injured Marines were protected. Her calm decisiveness was a stark contrast to the chaos around them. Every Marine watched her, trusting her judgment implicitly. Her defiance of orders had become their only hope. As the evening deepened, the valley seemed to shrink, shadows and smoke blending into a labyrinth of danger. Explosions rocked the ground, throwing dirt and debris into the air. Sarah kept moving, giving orders, assisting the wounded, and maintaining morale. She caught glimpses of fear in the Marines' eyes, but also determination, an unspoken acknowledgement that she was their anchor, their guide through the storm. Without her, the unit would falter. The enemy intensified their attack, attempting to breach the center of the line. Sarah sprinted across open terrain, bullets snapping past her, to reposition a group of Marines who had been pinned down. Move to cover. Suppressive fire now. Watch each other. Her voice rang with authority. The Marines followed, executing her commands with precision. Her courage, determination, and quick thinking became a shield for the 340 soldiers, protecting them from the overwhelming force of the enemy. Amid the firefight, Sarah noticed a small group of Marines trapped in a shallow depression, vulnerable to sniper fire. Without hesitation, she crawled through the open ground, dragging one wounded Marine after another into relative safety. Each movement was a calculated risk, yet each success reinforced trust and unity among the troops. Her actions demonstrated that leadership was not just strategy, it was personal, hands-on courage that could save lives in the most extreme circumstances. The enemy attempted to exploit the western ridge, sending a coordinated assault to break their defenses. Sarah called for squads to reposition, creating a secondary defensive line and coordinating counterfire. She moved rapidly between positions, shouting instructions, assessing threats, and adjusting strategies in real time. The Marines were battered, exhausted, and scared, yet they followed her every word. Her defiance of conventional orders leading, independently in the absence of command, was now the single most effective tactic in holding the line. Hours passed in a blur of smoke, fire, and chaos. Sarah rarely paused, though her body ached and her uniform was covered in dust, sweat, and blood. She provided words of encouragement to exhausted Marines, reassured the injured, and maintained eye contact with those struggling to regain composure. Every small victory holding a ridge, securing a wounded soldier, repelling an enemy push was celebrated quietly, a reminder that survival was possible even in overwhelming odds. By nightfall, the valley was a war-torn labyrinth of craters, scorched earth, and debris. Explosions had subsided, but sniper fire continued to intermittently crack the air. Sarah took stock of her Marines, battered, bruised, but alive. Injured soldiers were stabilized, positions fortified, and morale, though shaken, remained intact. The first wave of overwhelming odds had been survived, but the enemy had not yet been fully defeated. She gathered the squad leaders, whispering rapid instructions. Hold the line. Reinforce positions. Keep communication tight. We survive together, or we don't survive at all. Her voice was firm, calm, and unwavering. For the Marines, her defiance was no longer merely leadership. It was hope. Against impossible odds, she had proven that courage, decisiveness, and instinctive action could save hundreds of lives. As darkness enveloped the valley, Sarah scanned the horizon once more. Shadows moved across ridges, smoke swirled ominously, and distant explosions reminded everyone that the battle was far from over. Yet for now, the Marines were alive, organized, and ready. Her decisions had turned fear into action, chaos into coordination, and despair into determination. The enemy may have been relentless, but so was Sarah Hayes. In the silence between bursts of gunfire, she whispered a promise to herself and to the Marines. No one would be left behind. The night ahead would be long, the danger severe, but the Marines trusted her implicitly. She had faced overwhelming odds, and she had prevailed. Now, as the first stars pierced the darkening sky, Sarah Hayes prepared for the next wave, knowing that every decision she made could again be the difference between life and death. Night had fully descended upon the valley, draping the jagged terrain in darkness, pierced only by flickers of fire and muzzle flashes. Shadows danced along the craters and ridges, creating an eerie, unpredictable battlefield. The enemy, relentless and cunning, had regrouped, launching sporadic assaults designed to exploit fatigue and confusion. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes crouched behind a damaged armored vehicle, the weight of responsibility pressing against her shoulders. Every Marine under her command depended on her decisions now, and she knew the line between survival and catastrophe rested squarely on her resolve. The situation was dire. Smoke from recent explosions hung low, choking visibility and making every movement a calculated risk. Bullets tore through the air, ricocheting unpredictably off rocks and debris. Injured Marines groaned in pain, some unable to move, others trembling with fear. Sarah's gaze swept the battlefield, calculating, assessing, anticipating. Her mind raced, yet her voice remained calm, precise, authoritative. Form the left flank. Provide suppressive fire. Evacuate the wounded in 3-man teams. Her orders sliced through panic, imposing structure on chaos. Suddenly, a sharp cry rose from the northern ridge. A squad of Marines had been pinned behind rubble, their path to cover cut off by enemy fire. Without hesitation, Sarah sprinted across open ground, her boots kicking up dust and gravel. Bullets tore past her, ricocheting dangerously close, yet she pressed forward. Her heart pounded, adrenaline surged, and every instinct screamed caution, but she refused to hesitate. Lives depended on action, and hesitation would be deadly. She reached the trapped Marines and knelt beside them. "Follow my lead," she shouted. "We move together. Cover each other. One step at a time." Her presence alone galvanized the squad. Private Thompson, paralyzed by fear just hours earlier, now mirrored her confidence, moving decisively under her guidance. Sergeant McCullister coordinated suppressive fire with the remaining men, while Sarah directed each Marine through the narrow corridor to safety. The squad emerged, shaken but alive. As the rescued Marines reached cover, Sarah turned her attention back to the field. The enemy was attempting another push along the eastern approach, exploiting scattered pockets of resistance. She immediately repositioned squads, establishing crossfire zones that capitalized on the terrain. Rocks, craters, and debris became tools in her improvisational strategy. Each movement was calculated, every order precise. Her leadership transformed fear into coordination, chaos into controlled response. Even as exhaustion gnawed at her body, her mind remained razor-sharp. Amid the firefight, Sarah noticed a wounded Marine pinned near a scorched vehicle, too exposed to move safely. She didn't hesitate. Ignoring the hail of bullets, she dashed across the open ground, dragging him to relative safety. Another Marine followed her lead, inspired by her courage. Together, they managed to evacuate the soldier without further injury. Every act of bravery reinforced trust among the Marines. They were no longer merely following orders. They were fighting because their leader had shown them that survival was possible. The enemy adapted quickly, launching a coordinated strike at the western ridge. Sarah adjusted her strategy on the fly, issuing rapid-fire instructions. Squad 5, move to the ridge. Squad 6, provide covering fire. Evacuate wounded to the center. Her commands were executed with precision. The Marines moved as one, anticipating each other's actions, inspired by her example. Her defiance of protocol had become their lifeline, and every life saved strengthened the bond between leader and troops. Amidst the chaos, Sarah observed small acts of heroism around her Marines shielding each other, covering movements under fire, and dragging wounded comrades to safety. She acknowledged each with brief gestures, nods, and words of encouragement, maintaining morale even as fatigue threatened to overwhelm them. Leadership, she knew, was as much about human connection as it was about tactics. Every word of reassurance, every decisive action, reinforced trust and unity. Hours stretched into an eternity. Smoke, fire, and gunfire blended into a relentless sensory assault. Sarah moved tirelessly between positions, coordinating defense, assisting the injured, and assessing the enemy's strategies. Her body ached from exertion, but her resolve never wavered. She understood that each Marine's survival was not just a matter of skill or strategy, but of confidence in her leadership. In every command, she embedded clarity, purpose, and hope. Then, from the center of the battlefield, a sudden explosion sent shockwaves through the ranks. A supply cache had been hit, scattering ammunition and causing a small fire. Panic flared briefly among some of the less experienced Marines, but Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. Form up, secure the wounded, redistribute ammunition. Move now. Her orders were executed with precision, restoring order amidst potential disaster. Her calm decisiveness was contagious. Even in the face of extreme danger, her Marines moved as a unit, coordinated and disciplined. Amidst the firefight, Sarah identified another critical threat: a group of enemy combatants attempting to flank the rear. She quickly formulated a plan. Squad 4, intercept the ridge. I'll hold the center, covering fire only. Move quietly, strike decisively. Corporal Diaz led the interception, guided by Sarah's tactical oversight. From her position, she coordinated movements, providing updates and corrections in real time. The plan worked. The flank was neutralized, preventing further casualties and allowing the Marines to regain some control over the battlefield. As night deepened, Sarah recognized that leadership was more than strategy. It was personal. She moved from Marine to Marine, offering reassurance, assisting the wounded, and ensuring no one felt abandoned. Her presence alone was a stabilizing force, giving courage to the fearful and clarity to the overwhelmed. She embodied defiance, not recklessness, but calculated courage in the absence of command, a willingness to act when hesitation could mean death. By late night, the battlefield had begun to quiet slightly, the enemy withdrawing in response to the Marines' reinforced positions. Sarah surveyed the aftermath: wounded Marines, scorched terrain, smoke rising from scattered fires, but the critical fact remained. All 340 Marines were still alive. Her quick thinking, decisive action, and hands-on leadership had turned the tide, transforming panic into coordination, fear into resolve. In the eerie stillness between assaults, Sarah finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She checked her squad leaders, ensured the wounded were stable, and reassessed positions. Every command, every movement, every act of bravery had mattered. She knew that the next phase of the battle would demand even more courage, but for now, her leadership had carried the Marines through one of the deadliest hours of their lives. The night was long, the enemy unpredictable, and danger ever-present. Yet Sarah Hayes had proven that one person's courage, defiance, and determination could alter the course of events, saving hundreds of lives. Her Marines, battered but inspired, looked to her for guidance, ready to follow wherever she led. In the darkness of the valley, one truth was clear: heroic leadership, unwavering courage, and decisive action had given 340 Marines a fighting chance to survive the chaos of war. The valley was a shadowed labyrinth, scarred by fire, dust, and the echoes of relentless gunfire. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes crouched behind the remnants of a shattered wall, her body aching from hours of movement, yet her mind was sharper than ever. The Marines had survived the first waves, thanks to her decisive leadership and hands-on courage, but the enemy had not yet relented. Another assault loomed, more coordinated and dangerous than the previous ones. Every second was critical, and every choice carried the weight of hundreds of lives. Sarah scanned the battlefield, her eyes tracing the ridges, craters, and positions of both her troops and the enemy. Her instinct, honed over countless deployments, told her that the next few moves would determine the battle's outcome. The enemy had begun to converge on the center, attempting to exploit their exhaustion and the sparse defensive line. She knew a direct confrontation could cost dozens of lives. Thinking quickly, she formulated a bold plan of maneuver that would require precise timing, courage, and unwavering trust from her Marines. Her voice rose over the din of sporadic gunfire. Squads 2 and 6, prepare for a flanking maneuver. Suppressive fire only. Cover each other. We move on my signal. The Marines, battered but resolute, responded immediately, following her orders without hesitation. Even those who had moments earlier been paralyzed by fear now mirrored her confidence, executing their movements with precision. Sarah's defiance of protocol leading without command approval was no longer a risk. It was the only chance they had to survive. She glanced toward the northern ridge, where enemy forces had begun to mass, preparing for another assault. Without a moment's pause, she ran across the open ground, dodging a hail of bullets. Every step was measured, every movement calculated. She reached the wounded and assisted them into safer positions, refusing to leave anyone behind. Her actions inspired her Marines, turning hesitation into decisive action. Courage had become contagious, and the battlefield began to shift under her leadership. The flanking maneuver began. Squads 2 and 6 moved stealthily through cover, rifles poised, advancing on enemy positions from an unexpected angle. Sarah coordinated every detail, shouting instructions and corrections, ensuring each Marine knew their role. The enemy, caught off guard, faltered under the sudden assault. Explosions and gunfire erupted as the flanking squads disrupted their formations, forcing the attackers to retreat or risk being encircled. The balance of power in the valley was beginning to tilt, and Sarah knew it. Amid the chaos, a new threat emerged, a group of enemy combatants attempting to breach the center where the wounded and less experienced Marines were positioned. Sarah sprinted across open ground, bullets snapping past her, directing suppressive fire and reinforcing the center line. She grabbed a fallen rifle and returned fire, moving from cover to cover, ensuring the line held. Her courage, visibility, and decisiveness became a beacon for the Marines, guiding them through what could have been a catastrophic breach. From her elevated position on a ridge, Sarah could see the enemy scattering under the pressure of the coordinated assault. She directed squads to push forward carefully, advancing on positions while keeping the wounded protected. Her tactical brilliance was evident in every movement. She anticipated enemy responses, repositioned forces in real time, and maintained communication despite the ongoing chaos. Each decision reinforced her authority and trustworthiness, transforming the Marines' fear into coordinated, purposeful action. Hours of continuous engagement had left the Marines exhausted. Sweat, dust, and blood-coated uniforms, and many were limping from injuries. Yet under Sarah's guidance, they fought with determination. She moved tirelessly among them, offering words of encouragement, adjusting positions, and personally assisting the injured. Her presence alone was a stabilizing force, instilling courage where fear threatened to dominate. Every action reinforced her unspoken promise. No Marine would be left behind. The turning point came when the flanking maneuver fully disrupted the enemy's coordinated attack. The northern ridge, once a stronghold of enemy fire, was now under partial Marine control. Explosions and gunfire echoed as the remaining enemy forces attempted to retreat. Sarah quickly reorganized her squads, sealing gaps in the line and ensuring no one was exposed. Her decisive action had turned a precarious situation into a controlled counteroffensive. The Marines, inspired and guided by her leadership, moved with renewed precision and confidence. Even as night deepened, Sarah maintained clarity. She coordinated the extraction of the wounded, redistributed ammunition, and ensured defensive positions were fortified. Every Marine under her command was accounted for, every critical point secured. The valley, once a chaotic battlefield of uncertainty, was beginning to show signs of stability. The enemy was no longer dictating the pace of battle. Sarah had shifted momentum. Her strategic vision, courage under fire, and ability to act decisively without guidance from command had created a turning point, one that would save countless lives. In the midst of the valley, smoke curling around jagged rocks and debris, Sarah observed the effect of her actions. Marines who had moments ago been paralyzed by fear now moved confidently, coordinating with one another, executing maneuvers she had outlined in real time. The transformation was profound. The combination of courage, leadership, and trust had not only stabilized the situation, but had begun to place the Marines in a position of advantage. For Sarah, the victory was tactical but not complete. She knew the enemy could still regroup, and that the night would bring additional challenges. Yet for the first time since the ambush, she felt a surge of cautious optimism. Her decisions, though risky and defiant of standard protocol, had paid off. The Marines under her command were alive, organized, and prepared for the next phase. Each life saved reinforced the importance of bold, decisive leadership in the absence of guidance. As the first stars pierced the night sky, Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She surveyed her Marines, noting their fatigue, injuries, and resilience. She thought of the families and homes they were fighting to protect, and of the trust they had placed in her. She realized that the turning point had not been merely tactical. It had been a testament to human courage, leadership, and the extraordinary impact of one person's defiance in the face of chaos. The night air was tense, but quieter. Bullets still ricocheted occasionally, and distant explosions reminded everyone that danger remained. But for now, the Marines were regrouped, positions reinforced, and morale stabilized. Sarah Hayes had transformed a desperate, precarious situation into a controlled, strategic advantage. She had led 340 Marines through chaos, fear, and relentless enemy assault, proving that courage, initiative, and defiance could alter the outcome of life-and-death situations. Every Marine knew it. Every life she had saved bore witness. The turning point had been reached, and it had been defined not by orders from afar, but by the courage, tactical brilliance, and leadership of one woman standing unflinchingly in the eye of the storm. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, survival seemed possible. The first light of dawn crept cautiously over the valley, bathing the scarred landscape in a pale golden glow. The night's chaos had subsided, leaving a surreal quiet in its wake. Smoke rose from scorched earth, scattered fires flickered across debris-strewn ridges, and the distant groans of the injured echoed across the battlefield. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes moved carefully among her Marines, surveying the aftermath of the night's relentless fighting. Exhaustion etched deep lines into their faces, yet their survival was proof of extraordinary courage and leadership. The battle had been devastating. The terrain, once deceptively serene, was now a battlefield marked by craters, rubble, and signs of fierce struggle. Bodies of enemy combatants lay scattered, while the Marines, battered but alive, tended to injuries and regrouped. Sarah's heart ached at the sight of the wounded, each one a reminder of how fragile life had become in the past 24 hours. Yet even amidst the devastation, there was a palpable sense of triumph. They had endured against overwhelming odds, and they had survived. She moved swiftly, checking each squad. Corporal Diaz was assisting medics, his earlier injuries patched and functional. PFC Thompson, who had frozen under sniper fire the previous night, now moved with purpose, helping carry supplies and assist the wounded. Sergeant McAllister, grim-faced but steadfast, coordinated cleanup and defensive restructuring. Every Marine bore the marks of battle, but they were alive, and their trust in Sarah was unwavering. Her leadership had carried them through chaos, and now her focus shifted to ensuring their survival and readiness. The wounded required immediate attention. Sarah oversaw triage, directing medics to prioritize critical injuries, stabilize fractures, and manage blood loss. Supplies were scarce, and improvisation became essential. Bandages were fashioned from torn uniforms, makeshift stretchers created from equipment, and water rationed carefully. Sarah moved from Marine to Marine, offering guidance, reassurance, and her own hands-on assistance. Every action reinforced the bond between leader and troops. Her defiance of command protocols had been a lifeline, and now her meticulous attention ensured the Marines' continued survival. Amid the cleanup, Sarah took stock of the unit's defensive positions. The flanking maneuvers from the previous night had successfully repelled enemy attempts, but vulnerabilities remained. She reorganized squads, fortified positions using debris and terrain features, and established rotating watch schedules. Every precaution was necessary. The enemy might regroup, and she could not afford to leave her Marines exposed. Her mind worked tirelessly, anticipating threats even as her body screamed for rest. Despite exhaustion, Sarah also understood the importance of morale. She addressed her troops, her voice calm yet commanding. "We survived the night. Many of you faced fear, injury, and uncertainty, but you acted with courage. Hold on to that. We are still alive, together, and that is no small victory." The Marines, haggard and weary, responded with nods, quiet murmurs of acknowledgement, and a renewed sense of unity. Leadership, she knew, was as much about psychological fortitude as tactical precision. The bond forged in battle would endure beyond the valley. She allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. The events of the past night had been a crucible, testing not only her strategic skill, but her courage, judgment, and humanity. The lives of 340 Marines had rested on her defiance of standard procedure, her willingness to act decisively without guidance from command, and her relentless commitment to their survival. Each decision, each maneuver, each act of bravery had been critical. She had carried the weight of responsibility, and she had emerged not unscathed, but victorious. As the Marines began clearing debris, extinguishing fires, and tending to equipment, Sarah coordinated communication attempts with command. Radios crackled, and finally, a voice returned distant, formal, and concerned. Command requested a full status report. Sarah relayed their positions, the condition of the Marines, and the tactical situation with clarity and precision. There was acknowledgement, but also silence understanding, perhaps, that her independent leadership had been the deciding factor in survival. Despite the reprieve, danger lingered. The valley was no longer a site of active engagement, but the terrain remained treacherous, and enemy forces could still be nearby. Sarah maintained rotating patrols, assigned scouts to survey the surrounding ridges, and ensured defensive readiness. The Marines, though exhausted, followed her every instruction, their confidence in her unshakable. Her ability to inspire action and calm in the face of adversity had become the defining factor in the unit's resilience. Among the wounded, some had severe injuries that required evacuation. Sarah prioritized these cases, organizing transport routes and coordinating with armored vehicles and medics. She moved from one injured Marine to another, offering words of encouragement, personal reassurance, and tactical guidance to those helping carry the wounded. Her presence was a constant reminder that they were not alone, that their survival depended on collective effort and her unwavering leadership. The first rays of morning light illuminated the full extent of the battlefield. Craters pocked the earth, burned-out vehicles marked the chaos of combat, and scattered equipment testified to the intensity of the struggle. Yet amidst the destruction, the Marines were alive, organized, and ready to face whatever came next. Sarah's defiance, courage, and strategic brilliance had transformed a near catastrophe into survival, and the valley, though battered, now bore witness to extraordinary human resilience. By mid-morning, the remaining enemy forces had retreated, leaving behind the remnants of their failed assault. Sarah oversaw final sweeps of the area, ensuring no wounded or stragglers remained exposed. Each Marine was accounted for, every critical supply secured, and defensive positions reinforced. The valley, once a chaotic theater of war, had been stabilized. The Marines could breathe, however briefly, and gather the strength to continue their mission or return to safer positions. Amid the aftermath, Sarah gathered her squad leaders for a debrief. "We survived because of coordination, courage, and trust," she said. Every action mattered. Every life saved was the result of careful planning, decisive action, and willingness to act when the world seemed chaotic. Remember that. Her words were not boastful, but measured recognition of bravery and reinforcement of the lessons learned under fire. Her Marines listened, absorbing every nuance. Their respect for her deepened beyond duty or orders. In the quiet moments between tending to the wounded and reorganizing supplies, Sarah allowed herself to reflect on the extraordinary feat achieved. The Marines had faced overwhelming odds, ambushes, sniper fire, and relentless enemy assaults. Yet, under her leadership, all 340 had survived. Her defiance of standard protocol, willingness to act independently, and courage under fire had not only preserved life, but forged an unbreakable bond among the Marines. This battle would be remembered, not just for its intensity, but for the extraordinary leadership that had saved them. As the sun climbed higher, casting warmth over the valley, Sarah moved among her Marines, observing their faces, the exhaustion, the relief, the quiet pride. She knew that this battle, this night of terror and heroism, would leave lasting marks on them all. Yet she also knew that the lessons learned, the courage, the trust, the resilience, would endure far longer than scars or wounds. She had led by example, and in doing so, had secured not only survival, but the essence of what it meant to serve with honor and bravery. By the time evacuation and reorganization were complete, the valley was quiet. The surviving Marines stood together, tired but resolute, a testament to human endurance under fire. Sarah surveyed them, a sense of quiet pride filling her chest. Against overwhelming odds, they had endured, survived, and remained united. The aftermath was not victory in the traditional sense. It was survival. It was resilience. It was life. And it was all because one woman had refused to wait for orders when silence could have meant disaster. Weeks had passed since the harrowing battle in the valley, but the memory of that night remained vivid for every Marine who had survived. The air was no longer filled with gunfire, smoke, and chaos, but the lessons of survival and courage lingered. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes walked among her unit in the newly established camp, observing soldiers tending to wounds, repairing equipment, and quietly sharing stories of that fateful night. There was an unspoken reverence in their eyes, an acknowledgement that their survival had been shaped by one woman's courage, decisiveness, and unwavering leadership. Her reputation had already begun to precede her. Officers and enlisted alike spoke in hushed tones of her bold maneuvers, her hands-on guidance, and her ability to maintain clarity amidst overwhelming odds. Yet Sarah remained humble, insisting that the victory had been a collective effort. She moved from Marine to Marine, checking injuries, offering encouragement, and listening to accounts of their experiences. For her, leadership was not about accolades. It was about ensuring every Marine walked away alive. The formal recognition from command came in a quiet briefing tent weeks after the battle. Commanders who had initially expressed concern over her defiance now stood in solemn acknowledgement. Reports detailed her tactical ingenuity, the flanking maneuver that disrupted the enemy's formation, the hands-on evacuation of wounded Marines under fire, and her ability to coordinate 340 soldiers without direct orders. Each account confirmed what the Marines had already known. Lieutenant Hayes had saved lives when the chain of command had gone silent. As she stood before her superiors, Sarah maintained her characteristic composure. "My actions were not about recognition," she said firmly. "They were about survival. These Marines trusted me, and I could not let them down. Every decision, every risk was calculated to protect them." Her words resonated deeply. They were not just statements of fact. They reflected the essence of leadership under fire, the courage required to act decisively when hesitation could mean death. The awards and commendations arrived in the weeks that followed. Bronze stars, medals for valor, and official commendations were presented to the Marines, and Sarah herself received the highest honors for bravery and leadership under extreme conditions. Yet what mattered most to her was not the medal pinned to her chest, but the fact that all 340 Marines had survived. Each life saved was a testament to teamwork, courage, and her willingness to defy protocol when necessary. Reunions within the unit began quietly. Marines shared their experiences, laughing and crying in equal measure, recounting moments of fear and acts of bravery that had defined the night. Sarah listened, offering subtle guidance and reassurance, her presence both grounding and inspiring. She understood that these stories, the moments when courage triumphed over fear, would be remembered far longer than any official report or medal. They were the living legacy of what had transpired in the valley. News of the battle and Sarah's leadership spread beyond the military. Articles, reports, and interviews highlighted the extraordinary circumstances. A unit of 340 Marines facing overwhelming odds, cut off from command, surviving through courage, coordination, and one woman's decisive action. Civilians and military alike marveled at the story of defiance and heroism, inspiring discussions about leadership, initiative, and the human capacity for courage in moments of crisis. Sarah's name became synonymous with bravery under fire, but she consistently redirected attention to the Marines who had fought beside her. Within the unit, Sarah's leadership had forged bonds that would last a lifetime. The Marines had learned that survival depended on trust, coordination, and the willingness to act decisively. They had witnessed firsthand how one person's courage could alter the course of events, saving hundreds of lives. The lessons of that night, resilience, determination, and unwavering commitment, became embedded in the culture of the unit, passed down to future soldiers who would train and serve in their footsteps. Sarah herself continued to serve, her experiences in the valley shaping every decision she made afterward. Her leadership style evolved, emphasizing empowerment, initiative, and courage. She mentored younger officers and enlisted Marines, teaching them not only tactics and strategy, but also the importance of presence, calm under pressure, and moral responsibility. The valley had been a crucible, and from it emerged a leader who embodied the highest ideals of service, courage, and humanity. The story of that night was retold countless times in formal reports, training sessions, and personal recollections. Each retelling emphasized different aspects: the audacity of her maneuvers, her refusal to wait for orders, her hands-on approach in evacuating the wounded, and the morale boost she provided under unimaginable stress. Yet all accounts converged on one truth: Lieutenant Sarah Hayes' Defiance, bravery, and leadership had been the defining factor in the survival of 340 Marines. Years later, when those Marines recounted the events of the valley to new recruits, they spoke of more than tactics or strategy. They spoke of courage, trust, and resilience. They spoke of a leader who had risked everything to save them, who had refused to be paralyzed by uncertainty, and who had acted decisively when command had gone silent. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes' legacy became more than a story of one battle. It became a guiding principle for all who served alongside her. In quiet moments, Sarah reflected on that night with humility. She thought of the Marines she had led, the decisions she had made, and the lives that had been saved. Her actions had been born not from desire for recognition, but from a deep sense of duty and moral responsibility. She had chosen to act when inaction could have been fatal, and in doing so, had created a turning point that would be remembered for generations. The valley itself, once a scene of chaos and danger, became a symbol of resilience. The Marines had endured, and the lessons learned there influenced military training, leadership development, and strategic planning for years to come. Sarah's actions proved that even in the absence of orders, clarity of thought, courage, and decisive leadership could alter the course of events and save lives on a monumental scale. Ultimately, the story of Lieutenant Sarah Hayes and the 340 Marines became one of inspiration, a real-life testament to what extraordinary courage, defiance, and leadership can achieve. Her legacy endured not just in medals or reports, but in the lives she had saved, the Marines she had inspired, and the countless others who would carry her lessons forward. One woman's refusal to wait had saved hundreds, and her story would live on as a timeless example of heroism under fire. As she stood overlooking the valley one final time, Sarah Hayes understood the magnitude of what had occurred. The terrain was quiet now, the chaos faded into memory, yet the human spirit, the courage, determination, and resilience of the Marines remained indelibly etched into its contours. She had moved when command went silent. She had led when hesitation could have meant death. And in doing so, she had ensured that 340 lives would continue, forever bearing witness to the extraordinary power of leadership and courage.